The saga of the mother-in-law who always ends up facing karma when she messes with me. For context, I have a policy of accepting that my mother-in-law is always right. When she said I couldn't keep a secret, I started spilling everything. She said I was a terrible driver, and since then, when she tells me to turn right, I turn left and vice versa. This has been going on for decades, but they only moved near us about 10 years ago, and until last year they spent at least half the year at their other house or traveling. Yes, they're loaded, so they've only been enjoying my incompetence full-time for about 9 to 10 months now. This week is the anniversary of an event that, although significant to them and therefore should be to us, is practically ignored by the rest of the world. Plus, it's an insane time for the whole family involved. My husband is a professor. I also work in academia and we're in exam season. And for his sister's family, her husband and son work in accounting, her daughter in property management. It's tax season and first quarter closings right now. But none of that is more important than the event that must take priority over everything else. My in-laws don't even consider postponing the gathering activities to a weekend. Everything has to happen in the original 24-hour window. It started with a cocktail party last night, then tennis and golf and a big formal dinner tonight. No, I didn't marry a trust fund kid, but sometimes it feels that way. Last night was the opening shot. My husband has office hours that end at 6 p.m. and rarely does anyone show up that late. But the midterm was last week. I went to pick him up maybe 10 minutes before 6 p.m. and there was a line of students waiting to talk to him. He rushed through, said his goodbyes, etc. And we left at 6:30 p.m. and walked through the door of my in-laws' apartment before 7 p.m. We walked into a wall of screaming because we were late. We were supposed to be there at 5. My husband yelling back that he'd told them we wouldn't arrive before 6:30 and so on. Then we enter the main room where my mother-in-law announces to everyone that we're late because I simply can't be ready on time. In fact, I'm always late. I'm one of those people who don't respect other people's time. Those weren't her exact words, but that was the message. All my husband's protests that he was the one who had appointments until 6 p.m. fell on deaf ears. At one point, she even told him to stop covering for me exact words. This morning I was supposed to be at the brunch at 11. It's 11:57 right now and I thought I'd write this for you guys, then I'll get in the shower. My mother-in-law has called 7 times because she's asking to borrow my coffee urn for this brunch. That's right, my in-laws are part of the 1%, but she can't buy or rent her own coffee urn. Bitch, you said yourself I'm always late. Maybe you should have made other arrangements. Hope your friends are enjoying their no coffee edition brunch. It's 1:19. I just dropped off the urn. My mother-in-law called 3 more times and then my husband called asking what was going on. Honestly, he was kind of laughing. I told him, remember how I'm always late and don't give a damn about other people's schedules? He really laughed. He has classes until after 3 today, so he got out of this particular brunch. Anyway, I dropped off the urn. The caterer looked less than happy. She apologized to me, poor thing, and said the coffee station somehow never made it into the contract. I told her I was sure my mother-in-law asked them not to include it because she's cheap and planned to use mine, and not to worry so much. Then I took my sister-in-law and my niece to get our nails done. My mother-in-law's parting words. Be back by 2. We have to leave the venue by 3. That's right. She thinks we're going to clean up. Someone's in for a surprise mid-afternoon. And lastly, yes, I'm aware I'm being a bitch. No need to message me. You're right. There are nicer ways to handle this. Yes, all that is true. Right now, I could be explaining to my mother-in-law why I feel disrespected and why I think she's wrong and should be more considerate. We could have a discussion in the middle of her annual party. Instead, I'm deciding on nail polish. I'm thinking something gothic or neon. Number, update 1. This is kind of a continuation of my post today about my mother-in-law and the coffee urn, and how I'm never going to be on time to any of her events ever again. Specifically, she told a room full of people that I'm always late and disrespectful because of it. And since then I haven't been on time to anything. It was just last night, but I plan to make it a habit. When I left off, I'd decided on a dark magenta polish to clash completely with my natural ghost pale complexion. My niece went with neon green because it matches her dress for tonight, as much as a single color could. She looks like a Jewish Carmen Miranda. I'm not kidding, even a little. Her grandmother is going to lose it. My sister-in-law got a discreet peach pink because she's an adult. While we were getting our nails done, our phones wouldn't stop ringing. The guy who was taking care of us, we arrived without an appointment and we were in no hurry, kept asking if we needed to answer. None of us did. Later we found out the calls were from my mother-in-law, but also from the catering people, because my mother-in-law went to get her hair done, I imagine. And they had no one to hand over the coffee urn and the contents of the open bar too. Not my problem. Now seriously, I have nowhere to store it. In the end, my husband took care of it, chewed out his mother for not cleaning the urn and told her never to borrow it again. Seriously, it's a nightmare to clean. I bought it at a good price about 15 years ago and I'm pretty sure the pain of cleaning it is the reason. My mother-in-law was very upset and said I would come back to take care of all that and what was going to happen now with the alcohol, with cleaning the venue. And that's when my husband called me. I did take that call. He asked if I had agreed to clean the venue, etc., and I said no. The first time I heard about it was when we were leaving to get our nails done, and when my mother-in-law asked me I said, no thanks, which amused him because every time his parents give me a direct order, I always pretend they're asking me if I want something and I always answer, no, thanks. And I'll stop here to repeat. Someone tells you to do something? Bring me a beer. Give me the baby. Clean up this mess. And you smile and say, oh, no thanks. And you go do something else. Anything else? Take the baby to look at the curtains in the other room. Ask someone else in this room how their inflammatory bowel disease is going. Go make yourself a cup of tea. Whatever, just don't stand there waiting for an argument. I call it a non-confrontational confrontation because it leaves whoever's giving the order with nothing to do except admit they're giving orders. And since in my world they try to pretend I'm the rude one, I like to do it politely. Back to the call, I said. No, thanks. And my husband starts laughing and asks my mother-in-law if she had talked about this with me before today. He knew she hadn't and she grumbled. That's what it sounded like to me. Anyway, we talked about a couple of things and at the end he says, She never said she'd take care of cleaning the venue. You didn't even ask her. She, my sister-in-law, and my niece just got their nails done, so they're definitely not coming back to do it now. My sister-in-law is meeting my brother-in-law and my nephew at the hotel. My niece is getting ready at our house and we'll all be back before dinner. She whimpers a little more. He tells me, I'll be home shortly, and hangs up. When he got home, I found out he disassembled the coffee urn in her kitchen. Made a big mess. It's not hard to prevent the parts from falling all over the place, but there's a trick he didn't use, and he brought it home clean. This is what he was doing while she complained about how unreliable I was for not taking care of the event cleanup. This is a pretty typical interaction with my in-laws. They're not nice people. Everything is just another step in a negotiation with them. I know in the comments from the previous post people said my husband should defend me, etc., and he does. It just doesn't last from one encounter to the next. Right now, he just got out of a long hot shower after ranting about them when he got home. They told him to be at the apartment at 5:30. It's 6:55 now and we're going to take at least another half hour. The phone hasn't rung once, so I guess they got the message this time, but I don't think it was worth the upset. Number update 2. We walked through the door of the event, me, my husband, and my niece around 8:30 p.m. Anyone who's followed the story will remember my husband told his mother we'd be at her and my father-in-law's apartment at 5:30, or she told him. I honestly don't know. In any case, we never went to their apartment and instead arrived at the event just as the first people were starting to arrive. My mother-in-law left the receiving line to grab my husband and my niece, not me, and take them to my father-in-law, her sister, and her sister's husband. My husband abandoned the receiving line pretty much immediately. The nephew appeared from wherever he was not in the receiving line. Maybe he just arrived too and joined us, me and my husband. And he tells us there was a huge uproar when he and his parents arrived at the apartment, because apparently the caterers stole the alcohol from the brunch. It took about a minute and a half to clarify that they didn't keep it and only got rid of the open bottles because they can't leave them unsupervised and can't transport open containers from one place to another. The brunch was at the club in the complex where my in-laws live. The dinner was at another fancy place. I didn't show up to take care of cleaning up the brunch, so the only thing they could do was throw it away. The story of the caterer's theft was the topic of the night. And again, yes, the same company was in charge of the dinner. As for the evening, I didn't talk to my in-laws. I tried to thank them for dinner, but they were clearly avoiding me. Me, the niece, and the nephew were at the kids' table, ages 52, 33, and 30, respectively. But yes, we were among the youngest there. My husband made excuses at his table and joined us more or less when they served the appetizer. At one point, a man I don't know came over from my in-laws' table to talk to my husband, and ended up sitting with us for a while and then left. He seemed nice enough. If they recruited him to convince my husband to ditch me and return to his table, it didn't work. But for all I know, he was just interested in my husband's work. We left when they were bringing out dessert. After the toasts, etc., we're not animals. My husband had to work at 9 a.m. the next day and the nephew was leaving that night on a red-eye flight. He also had to work the next morning in a city about 1,000 miles from these events, so he came with us. The niece switched to her parents' table. My sister-in-law thanked me for the mani-pedi. I think she enjoyed it. It's hard to tell. She put up no resistance to answering the phone during the post-brunch meltdown, which is a good sign. And that's it. There was no more drama, at least for me. From now on, I'm permanently late to all my in-laws' events, but otherwise nothing has changed. Oh, and I'm not lending out the coffee urn again. My husband learned that lesson the hard way. Number, update 3. The niece and I were going over last week's family event and she was telling me some crap her grandparents pulled while she was here. Irrelevant to this story, but funny anyway. They scolded her for not spending more time with them. The niece and nephew arrived on the same flight, but her brother left earlier and she stayed with my in-laws, her maternal grandparents, 2 extra days. They went so far as to compare her unfavorably to her brother and say how wonderful it was that he was there for as long as he was. Then she reminded me of something I did maybe 8 years ago that she's since taken as her manual for dealing with her grandparents and their satellites, our word for flying monkeys. Context. My in-laws have a bad habit of committing me to do things without consulting me, or even letting me know they've done it until the very day of whatever it is. In this case, they told a friend that her family could stay at our house while attending a college sporting event nearby. We live very close to one of the most nationally known campuses, and in fact we turn down this same request from our own friends quite frequently. My father-in-law's friends had been complaining that hotels, etc., were all booked way in advance. And naturally my mother-in-law offered our guest room. Spoiler, we don't have one. Scene. We are me, the niece, other people I don't remember, but she swears we're there at a mandatory social gathering at my in-laws' house. The wife of the couple approaches. Her. Hi OP. Your mother-in-law told me we could stay at your house during the upcoming event. We have tickets to the game and what a nice gesture on your part, or thanks for offering, which I didn't, or whatever. Me. After a long pause. Your son and his wife still live in the very exclusive beach residential community, right? Because I want to go there the week of July 4th and I haven't been able to find a place that allows dogs. Her, with a doubtful face. Well, I couldn't tell you. I can't commit to anything without talking to my son and daughter-in-law. It's up to them. Me. I made a long pause and fixed eye contact. She turned around and left. The subject never came up again that I remember, certainly not between my in-laws and me. I went back to stuffing myself with shrimp cocktail, according to the niece, and I believe her. I know my posts make me sound like a boundary-repelling superhero. It's important to note that I've been dealing with these people for almost 30 years. The first half wasn't pretty for me, but it gradually improved. The last 10 years have been very unsatisfying for them. Number, update 4. Last week, I wrote about an annual event with my husband's family. Nothing to do with a religious holiday, just terrible timing this year. And there was a whole episode in which my coffee urn had a supporting role. The coffee urn's role was to arrive late to the brunch with me, the owner of said coffee urn. And then for my husband to spend X amount of time cleaning it and destroying his mother's kitchen, because caterers don't clean equipment that isn't theirs if you don't ask them to. Apparently my mother-in-law didn't, and my husband had the good sense to know that if he brought it back dirty after confirming that my in-laws could borrow it when I'd already said no, he was going to spend the next few weeks sleeping on someone else's couch. Yesterday I got a call from a friend of my mother-in-law asking me to please return my mother-in-law's coffee urn because they want to start using it at their weekly bridge club. I was speechless for a moment. Normally I can predict what crap she's going to try, but I didn't see this one coming. So I bought time and told the bridge friend I had no idea where my mother-in-law's coffee urn was. Because it doesn't exist. Sure. I certainly didn't take it home after the event, since I wasn't even there at the end. And the bridge friend agreed that indeed I had left before the brunch ended and never returned. I knew I could count on my mother-in-law complaining about me to her friends for not taking care of cleaning up the brunch. Then we both waited for the other to speak, but I have a policy of not filling silences after I've given an answer. Finally, she said something along the lines of my mother-in-law saying I took it, and I said I knew the caterers left all the things that weren't theirs in the venue and my husband went and took them to my in-laws. This is true. In fact, I haven't even been to their apartment since the cocktail party the night before the brunch, and then a light bulb went on and I said, you know what? Why don't you go to my mother-in-law's house and ask to see the place where she keeps her coffee urn? That thing is a monster, 3 feet tall, and in its box it sticks out about 2 inches from the closet shelf. I know perfectly well there isn't a coffee urn size gap in any of her storage spaces. Maybe someone cleaned it and stored it for her. Back and forth, but I avoided the conversation I'm sure they were guiding me to. It's not her coffee urn, it's mine, mine, mine. And I like to imagine my mother-in-law trying to explain to her bridge group that although it's her coffee urn, she keeps it at my house, which is smaller. Number update 5. I can't believe how much time I've spent writing about this coffee urn, but here's what will be the final word on it. I'm pretty sure. Several people suggested my husband buy her own coffee urn, maybe for Mother's Day. And it turns out he had the same idea because without me knowing, at about the same time my mother-in-law's friend called me, my mother-in-law called my husband. All I know about their conversation is that it didn't go the way my mother-in-law expected. The only reason I lent my coffee urn in the first place was that after I'd said no, when they asked if they could borrow it, she lied to my husband and said I'd said yes, and then changed my mind. I realize I could have said, go to hell, and just not given in when my husband asked me please, 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 just this once. Please literally baby talk, but I chose instead to lend it to her in the most inconvenient way I could. And this was, apparently, the core of her argument for why the urn should reside with her from now on. Other things happened in the background that I was unaware of, but the only thing I knew on the way to lunch with my in-laws last Sunday was that my husband was toying with the idea of buying his mother her own coffee urn and that he'd made it clear he didn't support her claim to Mina. All caught up. Good. Now the long part. We're in the dining room of their retirement community. Me once again stuffing myself with shrimp cocktail. I really love shrimp cocktail when who should appear but my mother-in-law's friend who called me. They have a brief gossip session so full of head nods toward me and dangling phrases that I can't believe they think I don't notice. I assume they want someone, anyone, to ask, what's wrong? No one does. Finally the friend can't take it anymore and blurts out, I know you lied to me, and was taking a breath to continue when my husband said, I lied to you. When? Which surprised even me. My mother-in-law starts with the, oh no, it's not the time and other nonsense, but my husband repeats himself and the friend says, no, OP lied to me when she said blah blah blah. And then he said it, I agree, someone's been lying. But OP doesn't have my mother's coffee urn. I looked into buying my mother her own coffee urn, but I can't afford it. I'll pause to say that my husband and I have each been in our professions for 20 to 30 years and we have no kids. We're not as loaded as my in-laws, but we could certainly afford a coffee urn. My face was just as what the fuck as everyone else's. And that's when he let it all out. While trying to locate an urn like mine for his mother, he discovered that first, my coffee urn is actually a chafer urn because it was made to work with canned fuel. I actually knew that, but had no idea it had another name. Also, it was never adapted with an external heating element that slides between the carafe and the canned fuel holder. And apparently that's key, since this electric element doesn't prevent someone from also trying to use canned fuel, and that's a major fire hazard. As a result, they no longer manufacture the unit I have, but it's highly prized among people who appreciate these things and is worth about $2,000. Yes, you read that right, $2,000. We all stood there kind of breathless, and then he said what made up for all previous transgressions. He told his mother that she had spread around that I had stolen her word something worth thousands of dollars in order to try to take that same high-value object from me, and that I deserved an apology. Now in front of her nosy friend he didn't use the word nosy. And fellow Redditors, she did it. She apologized, throwing only a mini pinch of blame at the friend, because according to her, the friend misunderstood something I know she's going to pay for. But that's between them. And then she asked if she could borrow it. Undoubtedly the only reason I got an apology. I said, no way, I want to sell it. Can we sell it? My husband said he'd actually found a buyer, the caterer from the brunch, so we sold it. The end. Number. Update 6. I've been gradually pulling away from all interaction with my narcissistic in-laws. My father-in-law is just as bad as my mother-in-law. And since last Mother's Day, I completely stopped coordinating anything for Mother's Day. I'm not going to stop and organize even the sealing of an envelope. Anyone who thinks this year went smooth as silk is dead wrong. It started after the last time I saw my in-laws, that is, the day I found out my coffee urn was worth some serious money. During that lunch, ideas were exchanged about what to do for Mother's Day, but I kept my head down and didn't comment on anything. On the way home, my husband asked what our plans were. We don't have kids, so there was no plan. But this year, my own mother was going to stay with us in late April and early May. I was going to take her to dinner at a specific restaurant on a specific day and call that Mother's Day. If my in-laws wanted to join that plan, he had to call the restaurant and change the number of diners, coordinate their arrival, etc. He not only did so, but he himself was late to that dinner because calendars are hard. We had a nice dinner. I gave my mother her gift. A few days later, I put her on a plane and was done with it. Then came last Thursday. Last Thursday, for reasons only he knows, my husband decided to join my in-laws for lunch. completely forgetting that Thursday is bridge day. Seriously, calendars are hard. He walked in expecting to give his parents a nice surprise and instead got an earful about what my in-laws were saying about their daughter-in-law's total failure to their buddies. I assume they probably also had some choice words for him. And being the son of two people who never make hysterical scenes in public, he kept totally calm. Yeah, right. To be fair, I don't really know what happened, except that around 2 p.m. my phone started ringing, and for the first time since I stopped answering when my in-laws call, my mother-in-law left a voicemail. She was sobbing, wailing, handing the phone to a random friend who apologized for her because my mother-in-law was so upset. She did this several times. The last message was just sniffling. When my husband got home that night, I asked, "What the hell?" And all he said is that I'm permanently excused from spending time with them for the time being, which I'd mostly already done, and that he doesn't know when he'll feel like seeing them either. This is new. Also, he was very hungry because he didn't end up eating lunch. And what can I say? The opportunity was served up. I asked him if he at least had coffee. He called me a smartass. I spent Mother's Day out with the dogs and came home to find my husband had finished a home repair I'd given up on and started another one I thought we'd have to hire someone for. I called my own mother, she wasn't available, called me back, and that was the only time the phone rang all day. Number, update 7. I mentioned in an older post that we skipped Mother's Day and it was wonderful. Seems my mother-in-law got the hint she didn't call to complain. Nothing. We didn't see them on Memorial Day weekend either, but I knew dodging Father's Day too was extremely unlikely. So I prepared myself. Or rather, I didn't. My in-laws have always had a divide and conquer strategy and it hasn't worked for years. My husband doesn't exactly trust them, but he's known to give in and beg me to give in too just to get them off his back. Sometimes I do too, sometimes not. Lately we've entered a black ice patch of me not doing that. Father's Day started wonderfully with my husband arriving approximately 2 hours late. He's habitually unpunctual, and in the old days I'd say things like, "Aren't we supposed to be there already?" But guess who didn't say a word? I got dressed, sat with a book, and waited for him to be ready. Already on the way we live less than 20 miles from them, he called and said we'd see them at the restaurant, a little closer to them than to us, but still halfway, instead of at their apartment. But it turns out we were their ride. Stuff happens, things, and we arrived at the restaurant almost 3 hours after the reservation, only to discover there was no reservation. Not that it would have mattered. All three looked at me. I don't think my husband had caught on to what "I'm not doing the dirty work of your relationship with your parents anymore" really meant until that moment. In previous years I would have helped choose the restaurant, reminded him to confirm times, and made the reservation. You'd think 3 supposedly intelligent people would notice there were no preliminary calls. My husband, of course, knew I had no idea what restaurant had been chosen that very morning, but the ramifications didn't click for him until we were standing at the hostess stand hearing sorry. Due to the lateness and it being Sunday, the last brunch seating was full and there was no way to get a table. I laughed out loud and went back to sit in the car with my book Times, The Widow Wolf Times by Victoria Bout, for the curious. The 3 of them stood in a downpour having some kind of discussion. It's like they forgot they were going to get in the same car no matter what they decided. Eventually they all get in the car and my husband tells me we're all going to our house. I looked at him with dead eyes and said, "Well, you're going to have to stop and buy something to eat because there's nothing at home that doesn't require preparation and I'm not cooking." There's a jumble of voices in the car, some in English, others not. Historically, I've tried to understand what was going on. This time I took out my book and started reading again. Eventually they calmed down and I looked up. My husband said, "It's also too late to eat in my parents' community dining room." I'm not surprised, so I guess we'll stop at the supermarket and buy something. I said, "Okay." And it was, until we got to the supermarket. Everyone got out of the car and I took out my book again. Once again, all 3 were outside the car staring at me and I kept reading inside. Another argument breaks out, but eventually they all go into the store. They were gone a long, long time. When they came back, they loaded a very full shopping cart into the trunk. It's pretty clear that was my in-laws' plan from the beginning, though they probably thought they'd also eat at a restaurant. When my husband got back in the car, it was so hard not to say, "Lucky your parents brought their shopping list, eh?" But I bit my tongue and then was glad I did, though the smile wouldn't fit on my face. When we got to their building, my husband jumped out and started loading bags. Me, you can imagine, opened my book and kept reading. This time he started to lose his cool and said something like, "Are you going to sit there or are you going to help?" And I replied, "I'm not going to help if you can't ask me nicer than that." He asked please through gritted teeth and that's where I got my revenge. I got out of the car, told him to put the bags back in the trunk, turned to my in-laws and said, "Go get the cart," and waited. My husband practically yelled, "The cart!" And I said, "Yeah, your parents forget everything, like when they remember the shopping list but forget their wallets." By the look on his face, I knew we'd just bought them groceries. Everything gets loaded on the cart, goes upstairs, and I put everything on their kitchen table and counters. They really went crazy, buying, cleaning products, duplicates of things they won't use in a month or 3. Classic scam. And then I asked, "So are we eating together or is that it?" My mother-in-law started complaining that everything is too high in the cabinets and that we had to put it away. My husband actually started helping until I said, "What's the point of putting these things where they can't reach them? How are they going to use them?" I started opening the lower cabinets. Sure enough, they were full of duplicates of what we'd just bought. My husband had a box of crackers in his hand. There were 2 more in the same bag and there, on the shelf, was another identical box. I asked, "Were they on sale or something?" He said, "I don't think so." He put down the box, said Happy Father's Day to his father, kissed his mother, and we left. In the car back home he barely spoke. After we ate sandwiches I really didn't have anything ready for dinner. He asked me if it was always like this with them and I said, "More or less. Except I get to listen to complaints about everything, including me, my clothes, my hair, my driving." He said, "I'm sorry. I don't know why they act like that. I don't know what they get out of it. I guess they're going to be like this forever." I agreed they probably have no idea there are other ways to behave and that it doesn't make sense to try to change them, but that I needed a break. He said he understood and that he could also use some time off. but I know he won't really take it. They're elderly. They really can't live independently much longer if they can now, and this will be our reality for a while at least. But I'm done organizing my own misery, and I think my husband is now clear on what that means. We had a quiet night. We watched Times I Don't Feel at Home in This World Anymore asterisk. We had ice cream and went to bed. Edit. Added the cart to the shopping cart. Number. Update 8. A little over a month ago, my mother-in-law, the spousal half of my narcissistic in-laws, had a bad fall in the night and was in the ER when we found out. That makes for a toxic in-law story. But the summary is, phones are hard, especially when you're panicking, but sure she could drive. We didn't find out until hours later because although calls were made, no messages were left. For 4 days, she was really, really bad. She had multiple episodes in the hospital. My in-laws were completely unprepared for any emergency. I'm barely in my 50 seconds, not my 90 seconds, and we still have lists of my current medications, thyroid and my husband's mostly cardiac on a card in my wallet and in his. There's also an album on my phone and his called Medications with the labels, including dose, date, and doctor. So my mother-in-law stopped taking 2 medications, one for the heart and one steroid, which come with warnings not to stop suddenly. This in addition to the effects of the fall. Meanwhile, we learn she has a broken pelvis, doesn't have to go through surgery, but because there's no real cure. And in the avalanche of tests, they also found a small tumor and then several very small ones in the chest cavity. Fun. I have enough toxic in-law stories to win an award, but this is about toxic mother-in-law, so I'll limit myself to her. Which brings us to the day she was discharged from the hospital to go to a rehab facility. She still had very limited mobility. The walker helped, but she had trouble balancing within it and couldn't go from sitting to standing or vice versa without someone stabilizing her. And then there was the rash all over her body, because you really shouldn't stop steroids cold turkey, etc. She was in a lot of pain. I mentioned the broken ribs also from the fall, or the sprained wrist. So the discharge doctor prescribed an opioid for pain. They sent me to the pharmacy while my husband and his sister, the scapegoat, yes, the scapegoat took a flight the morning she found out her mother had fallen, went behind the ambulance. At the pharmacy, I found out that although the doctor, actually her nurse, had called in the prescription, they didn't include my mother-in-law's Medicare Part D information. So I was looking at a bill of a couple $100 that I knew should be like $10. I called my husband and asked him to get my mother-in-law's Medicare info, and while he was at it, to ask them for their credit card. He said he'd call me back, lots of work, settling the patient, etc. That's why I always carry a book. I sat down, started reading, and without realizing it, almost an hour passed. Asterisk, the Jane Eyre case, times I've read the series, it still grabs me. I called my husband again and it was just him and my mother-in-law. My sister-in-law and my father-in-law had gone to get something to eat. Though he wouldn't admit it, he'd probably forgotten about me completely. I asked him to get my mother-in-law's Medicare info and either a credit card from my in-laws to pay for this medication. I could hear their conversation in the background. She wants her painkillers now and clearly I ruined everything. She was yelling at whoever was in the room about how I can't do anything right, that I'm useless, and I heard my husband try to defend me, but mostly saying, OP is at the pharmacy now. She needs your Medicare information to get the medication. Which wasn't strictly true, but close. Finally, I got tired of hearing it. I told him I was going to text him the pharmacy phone number and once he had the info he could give it directly to them. He agreed that unless I wanted to stay on the line while she decided to give him the information, that was probably best. I hung up, pulled up the pharmacy number and texted it to my husband and my sister-in-law. My in-laws don't text, and I realized my battery, while not dead, probably didn't have another 2 hours. So I did what any good Redditor would do, plugged it in and put it on airplane mode. Then I went back to my book. For me, not much happened until well past another hour. For those keeping track, I'm now on my 3rd hour sitting in the pharmacy. The pharmacy assistant called me by my name, not the name the prescription would be under, to the counter, and told me my husband was on her phone, and that although it was strictly against the rules to let customers use the phone, she was willing to be a messenger. Not in those words. We had a conversation about how my battery was dying and that's why I turned off the phone to recharge. Half true, I didn't intend to omit anything. I just didn't think the assistant needed to know it charges faster on airplane mode. My husband told me to just pick up the medications and he'd sort it out later, and I said, perfect, just give them a card number because I'm not carrying that much cash. He and the assistant had a back and forth where she read him the full price and he naturally freaked out about having to pay a couple $100 out of pocket because his parents can't give him a straight answer. He asked me through the assistant to wait a little longer, and then they talked about something and hung up. Just before hour 4, they called me to the counter and gave me the medications. I drove to the rehab facility, left them at the nursing station. In all this, it occurred to no one to tell me what my mother-in-law's room was, and I went home to see the dogs. I also forgot to turn off airplane mode. My bad, but it had been a long day. Later, having dinner with my very apologetic husband really and my sister-in-law, who had flown in to take care of her mother and was leaving that night because her parents are seriously horrible people, I heard the other sides of the story. After they got my mother-in-law more or less settled, my father-in-law started acting out. He's his own circus, so my sister-in-law decided to take him to eat. My husband was sitting with my mother-in-law when I called him the second time to push him on the Medicare info, and I texted him and my sister-in-law the pharmacy info. What followed was a loop of insanity. Although the necessary info was in the paperwork that accompanied her to rehab and that my husband had just handed over when they arrived, my mother-in-law specifically refused to have that information given to my husband for privacy reasons. Since she made this statement in front of staff, now HIPAA comes into play. They can't give him that information until she signs something authorizing it. Their hands are tied, so he calls me to say pay for it. He still doesn't know how much it'll cost. That conversation is from the future, but I disappeared. My phone says I'm not receiving calls, airplane mode, and the app we use to locate each other by GPS because we work on a university campus and spend maybe 25% of the time in our offices, says I'm nowhere. Airplane mode. He calls home, we have a landline, we live in a signal hole, and nothing, and that's when he starts to fall apart. A little context. He'd spent every free hour shining as the golden sun to his sick mother. And after the first day when she started telling the hospital staff how horrible I am, I decided I was better off happy and I left. As a result, he and I had barely seen each other. Once he tried to convince me that special circumstances applied and I shouldn't hold her hospital behavior against her. And I answered something like, I never expected a hateful cow to go into the hospital and behave better than before. And since she has no credit with me, maybe her friend, the one from the coffee urn story, will come clean her ass now that she can't. So there was a bit of ice between us. When I disappeared from the face of the earth, after he'd spent a couple of hours listening to my mother-in-law tell everyone what a terrible person I am, he decided I was leaving him. Then he recognized that he probably wouldn't have stayed if it were my mother behaving like that and me pushing him to take care of her, and that convinced him I was gone. By this point, my sister-in-law and my father-in-law are back, and she points out that my last known location was the pharmacy and I'd given the pharmacy phone number. Why doesn't he call the pharmacy and see if I'm there? He does, but they don't put me on. They just confirm I'm there and we have the mini relay chat I already told. For me, it's the next episode of a stupid story. But he couldn't read my mood through the assistant or from what little he heard of me in the background, except that it seemed I didn't want to talk to him. It wasn't true. I had no idea it was important to him. There was nothing new on my end. He doesn't feel better about us, but at least now he has a goal: get the info from my in-laws. This is where everything goes to hell. My mother-in-law keeps refusing to give my husband her Medicare drug info, but she's also starting to feel big time the effects of being off her painkillers. The hospital doctor could have sent the prescription to be filled at the rehab facility, but I mentioned this was all on July 4th weekend. Yeah, so the internal pharmacy was closed, they would have had to send it out anyway. Giving it directly to the external pharmacy was supposed to make life easier, but not with my in-laws. Apparently there was wailing, sobbing, tantrums. My sister-in-law decided to take charge. She probably barely understood what the problem was. She went outside and made a call, but no one noticed. After a while, rehab decided to resend the prescription. They called the pharmacy themselves to discover it's already filled and gone. And because it's opioids, it can't be filled twice. At some point, my sister-in-law comes back into the room and tells them she has all my in-laws' information on her phone. Keep in mind she's been in the front row for over a week. While my mother-in-law was in the hospital, my sister-in-law filled out every form and wrote down the information that came up over and over. My mother-in-law's Medicare info, her prescription plan, her card, everything. So she decided to call the pharmacy with the information I'd asked for hours before. My in-laws went crazy, spewed hate everywhere. That she was disloyal, that she was trying to rob them, that they never wanted her to have that information and demanded she give it back. Give it back. I've mentioned my in-laws are rich and they are, but my sister-in-law's husband is way richer. There's literally no reason for this. Rereading, I realize I don't even know if she gave the pharmacy my in-law's card. It's possible she paid for it herself and they still accused her of stealing. My sister-in-law left crying, decided not to stay during rehab and bought a flight home that night. They also said quite a bit about me. I deduced later from my husband's extreme contrition when I came back from running with the dogs that was pretty toxic. Once my sister-in-law left rehab, she just went back to her parents' apartment, and my husband got to receive what he normally doesn't see. Keep in mind, my mother-in-law very likely was in a lot of pain. Self-inflicted, but pain nonetheless. And there was no one else to blame, because what happens has to be someone's fault and it can't be hers. She unloaded about 30 minutes of what her sister and I have been receiving for years on him and he couldn't take it. He started dialing like crazy. He called my cell still on airplane mode, called home. I wasn't there, or if I was outside with the dogs. He called every friend of mine whose number he has in case I decided to stay with them. He was pacing back and forth in front of my mother-in-law's room, thinking what to do when a nurse appeared with the medications. All she could tell him is that someone from the pharmacy had delivered them. He decided to go home where he found me. When I came back with the dogs, his car was blocking mine in the driveway. Something I didn't even register. Why would I? Then he admitted he wanted to make sure I didn't finish packing and leave without hearing him out. Yes, yikes. And now I know I should probably have a go bag, but he's a changed man. Now he stops by to see his mother twice a week on his way home from work, and except that he's late for dinner those days, it doesn't affect me at all. If she needs him to run errands, I'm not in the middle. Her stay in rehab has been extended because my sister-in-law decided she won't be helping again anytime soon, and my father-in-law really can't handle my mother-in-law alone. I only know this from talking to my niece, my sister-in-law's daughter, who also explained to her grandparents that she wouldn't be available either. My husband hasn't told me a word about this. Next week we have a vacation trip planned for a long time. When this started, my husband hinted that maybe we'd have to cancel. Last night I heard him tell my father-in-law on the phone that he didn't need the hotel info because he could call him directly on his cell. My mother-in-law will likely go home that same weekend. My husband suggested they hire a nurse for the first few days and nights, because we'll be away. Number, update 9. I've gotten some questions about what happened next, so I thought I'd share. Actually nothing. When I left off, my husband had a kind of breakdown after what for him was extreme behavior from his parents and for me and his sister was just another day. I want to clarify his parents have been treating me and her like garbage for years and he's just realizing it. You can skip this if you don't want to read my rant. During the first 15 years of our relationship, we'd see them maybe 3 times a year and never more than a weekend, often less. A single meal was normal. They had multiple homes in the US, one in Europe, and traveled the world for fun. My husband and I have jobs that anchor us geographically. After living here, where we still live, for a few years, they bought a house in a very exclusive retirement community nearby, but we still saw them little. Things got worse as far as my relationship with them goes and my husband wasn't totally in tune with me, but he rarely said anything negative to me about how I handled them. It was during that period when he said, "That's how they are." If I responded, "Being that way, it'll hardly be the first time someone gets fed up with their shit, and calling them out on their shit is how I am." Another conversation around that time included him saying, "You don't make it easy, do you?" And I asked, "Why is it my job to make it easy? I'm not asking anything from anyone. Everyone go to their corner and the first one who wants something from someone else can go fuck themselves." Yes, it was unpleasant, but that's the worst it ever got. And let's be honest, half a dozen uncomfortable conversations a year is nothing, right? Especially because they were that conversations. No one stayed bitter for days or kept dwelling on it. We had the conversation and then moved on to another topic. Until my in-laws' health started to fail. It started going downhill around Thanksgiving 2015, got worse during that year, and went completely to hell at Thanksgiving 2016. Almost all my stories of trolling my mother-in-law, etc., occurred between December 2015 and November 2016. To make it worse, my husband got involved in research on another continent, so although he was around while teaching, the rest of the time he was away and often made quick Friday to Monday trips, even during semester. That left me dealing with my in-laws and their picking alone. No one's fault. That's just how it was. Man, wall of text. Sorry. I guess my point is that my husband's involvement with his parents changed, largely because 2 years ago there wasn't much to involve. I can handle 1 or 2 dinners a year with almost anyone, if there's enough people and plenty of shrimp cocktail. And for a long time that's all it was. When they started needing him, or at least needing someone, feelings surfaced. Which brings us to now into our vacation and what's happening. First, we went on vacation. It was wonderful. We were supposed to leave on a Friday and had about 7 hours of driving ahead, but an invitation came up from friends who live about 5 hours along the route. So we left that Wednesday afternoon. We arrived quite late and spent Thursday and Friday with them. Before leaving home I said, "It'll be interesting to see what your dad does to try to delay this trip, especially when he realizes we've already left." My husband said he hoped I was being ridiculous, but Friday morning we did get a call from my father-in-law. He insisted that whatever it was couldn't be discussed over the phone and my husband had to come to his apartment. He wasn't amused to learn we were already several hours away and he was going to have to give a very good reason to make us come back. In the end, the issue was that the changes that needed to be made to his apartment for my mother-in-law to come home had to be done for her to return the next day. I guess he thought my husband was going to spend the day installing grab bars. I don't know. In any case, my mother-in-law didn't come home that weekend for reasons I'm not entirely clear on. Basically because I'm not interested enough to ask. If she came home on Tuesday or Wednesday, I'm not sure either. But she didn't last even one night because she had another fall. It wasn't as catastrophic as the previous one, but it was enough to determine she needs more help and supervision than my father-in-law can give her. For example, after this fall, he couldn't lift her up. Not that it hurt her too much, he just didn't have the strength. My mother-in-law is skinny and not tall. I'd be surprised if she weighs 120 pounds, so it's pretty clear my father-in-law probably will never be able to care for her alone. Anyone reading my previous posts closely will ask what happened with the overnight help that had already been discussed. I'm not 100% sure, as no one confirms it, but I think she went on vacation with her husband. As for backup overnight help, my long-suffering sister-in-law is in Iceland. After the shit show that was her last interaction with her parents, my sister-in-law booked herself a cruise to see icebergs while you still can and won't be back until next week. And by back, I mean back to her own house, about 10 miles from here. And so here we are. My husband has gone to see his mother once since we got back 5 days ago, but because of her HIPAA tantrum there's not much anyone can tell him. He says she's clearly very depressed, barely participates in her own rehab and mostly just sits there. He asked if she wanted anything. He was thinking special food, she doesn't have a restricted diet, at least she didn't before, or a book, just whatever. And she just shook her head and started crying. Then my father-in-law started yelling. He has no other volume. Never did. About ungrateful children and my husband left. I hope there's enough mother-in-law in this to still be worthy of this sub, but I understand if not. Number, update 10. We're still putting our lives back together after Hurricane Irma's visit. We're not in one of the hardest hit areas, but we live in a rural area, so lots of fallen trees. Power was out for over a week and we still don't have consistent internet. I'm not complaining. Lots of people are much worse off. Just explaining. A few things with my mother-in-law happened on the road to Irma. First, my husband and I were cornered into a meeting with my in-laws and some guys from administration. That's what we thought in their community. That day we carpooled with my husband. I'm not sure they expected me and it didn't go well for them. My in-laws explained to who turned out to be physical therapy staff and a social worker, I think, how uncomfortable they are with strangers in their home. And I asked what brand their toilet bowl cleaner is. In the silence that followed, I pointed out that either they clean their own toilets, spoiler, never, or they're comfortable with strangers doing it. Then I asked about detergent brands and how they manage sheets and towels having only a mini washer in their apartment. Or strangers do that for them too. One of the health workers stepped in with, "This is actually more of a medical issue." And my husband told her that in fact we're specifically excluded from knowing my mother-in-law's medical issues by HIPAA. I was so proud. He used her own HIPAA order against her. I know, I'm terrible, but everyone's faces in the room were priceless. The emergency meeting about my mother-in-law's home care, which is what the staff thought it was going to be about, ended pretty quickly after that, and we had 1, 2, 3 precious days floating in a cloud free of in-laws. We took advantage of that free time to clear debris, tape windows, label supplies. We have horses, our own cattle and boarded ones, etc., because Hurricane Irma was coming our way, and it did. By Sunday night we were exhausted. So I forgive my husband his very brief stumble. It lasted less than it takes me to write it. My mother-in-law called in a panic. The hurricane was really going to hit us, and it did, and she couldn't find any in-home care person to help her. Plus, she left it too late and there was no temporary spot for her at the facility she'd just been discharged from. The reality is she can't be without some kind of assistance. She's fine with the walker, but she can't sit down, stand up, etc., without a hand to guide her. She begged to evacuate to our house, and my husband looked at me with panic in his eyes. So I answered him. If you're comfortable helping your mother get on and off the air mattress on the floor, we don't have a guest room using our toilet without a grab bar. Getting in and out of the outdoor shower, the one we use when the power goes out, and generally taking care of her hygiene and care, I'm not going to stand in the way. Then I left the room, so I don't know the details, but I know he suggested opening the wallet a little wider to find someone willing to stay with them. They did, and it worked. A couple weeks later I heard through a third party my in-laws told my nephew, my sister-in-law's adult son, who told my niece, his adult sister, And then my niece told me that they thought I should have been a little more concerned about the balance of their inheritance. My nephew, not knowing the idea hadn't even come from me, told them that if they wanted me to worry about their estate, maybe they shouldn't have been so quick to tell me I'm not in their will. In the end, we all had a quiet hurricane. Well, we lost power and phones for a week, and internet just came back this morning. There was, and still is, a lot of cleanup. There's so much debris piled on the sides of local roads that they're effectively single lane. So regular services like garbage pickup are still delayed, weeks delayed. But even when my in-laws lost power for a day, they never considered coming here. And since we didn't have a working phone, our cells only had signal closer to town, I've been completely out of the loop regarding my in-laws' shenanigans. I know it won't last forever, but it's been Hurricane Irma's silver lining. Number, update 11. Life has been largely free of my narcissistic in-laws. There have been some bumps and thanks to everyone who's messaged me, but the real inconvenience in my life continues to be Hurricane Irma. Our road is still closed to through traffic, school bus, mail carrier, garbage truck, and the landline and internet continue to be unreliable. We've been told the road should be clear by mid-February, but as someone who was told their roads would be clear by mid-December and is still dealing with detours, I have my doubts. But you didn't click to read old weather news, did you? So here are the highlights from my in-laws. Thanksgiving was a total non-event. My in-laws pretended I'd never said never again and invited people to my house for Thanksgiving dinner because of course they would. My sister-in-law, the scapegoat, found out, called me. I'd seen it coming weeks in advance, but she's so sweet she helped. And then she scheduled her family's visit a couple weekends before for work reasons. Yes, air quotes were used. My in-laws doubled down and invited even more people. Eventually they sent me an email with the time and guest list that my husband forwarded, making sure to put them in copy, saying that since we hadn't heard from my in-laws that they were hosting, I was about to accept an invitation from a friend. So husband, what's it going to be? Are we going to my in-laws or going to my friends? Or is he cooking for my in-laws and their friends while I go to my friends? Then I disconnected for 6 hours and by the time I came back, my husband and I and no one else were joining my in-laws at the Thanksgiving buffet in their community dining room. It was never mentioned again, really. We had an early lunch. We joined the friends for dessert and drinks and it was wonderful. My mother-in-law still wasn't participating in her rehab. She was very depressed. It also became clear her wrist was much more than a sprain. It may have happened in the first fall. It may have been in the next one. There may have been another fall we never heard about. But they operated to remove bone fragments. There's not much more they can do, so my mother-in-law has lost real use of her left hand. Her fingers can fold over the palm, but not enough to hold something thin, like a card or other papers, nor with enough force to grab something heavy, like a cell phone. They've taped her thumb to the side of her hand because it kept getting caught on things. Around that time, my father-in-law behaved so much like an asshole that he was forcibly removed from a physical therapy session in early November, and can't enter the building anymore either. Then they prescribed my mother-in-law antidepressants, and she's actually taking them. She's a new person, not a person I want to spend time with, but she's certainly less hateful, though not totally unhateable. For example, she can't hold a book so she discovered audiobooks and likes to play them at full volume near my father-in-law, who claims, and maybe it's true, that they interfere with his hearing aid. Her response was more or less too bad in her native language. So the pills take the edge off, but she's not nearly drugged enough for me to want a relationship with her. We remain off her list of people who can know what's going on with her health, so that's all I know. And that would be the closure on my mother-in-law. But there's related news at the Christmas party. In addition to my in-laws being at this event, the friend listed in the coffee urn wars was also there with someone who was clearly her adult son. He looked just like her husband and a very young, very pretty woman, wearing a giant diamond and wedding band on her left ring finger. I decided to introduce myself, which at first went well, really, and then I just stood there and praised all the virtues the friend attributed to her own daughter-in-law while comparing me unfavorably. The highlights included how she was helping her daughter-in-law with her house, because the daughter-in-law's taste was too low class. The daughter-in-law wore a stripper dress to her in-laws club, so I can see how she and my mother-in-law's friend might have different ideas, and how I should be more receptive to my own mother-in-law's advice. So I asked how the daughter-in-law was enjoying her, teaching her everything she needed to know about interior design and everything else she was doing wrong. I also let slip everything I remembered about the daughter-in-law's family that my mother-in-law's friend and my mother-in-law had told me. Family members going into rehab. The car that was repossessed, it wasn't exactly what I repeated, but it was that kind of super personal stuff that the friend had told all her bridge friends. At some point, the friend told me to shut my stupid mouth while her daughter-in-law turned around and left with the son chasing after her. I'm also thrilled to be uninvited to the Valentine's dance. Number. Update 12. Last time we talked, I'd been unceremoniously uninvited to the Valentine's dance at my narcissistic in-laws club. What I didn't say then was that first, I had no idea I was invited. Second, I had no idea I was expected. And third, I had no plans to attend, whether I was invited and expected or not. When my in-laws asked my husband in my presence if he was planning to go with them for a bit, I said, sure, so I can tell people you're spending Valentine's Day with the first vagina you came out of. I'd had maybe a little too much to drink. Though surprisingly, drunk me is much less aggressive than sober me. Drunk me thinks she's hilarious. Plus she repeats herself at top volume and I'm sorry to say, cackles. All this to say I didn't see or talk to my in-laws until late February, which suited me fine. In the week after the dance, my husband didn't attend. My in-laws contacted him saying they had to talk, etc., and they arranged a dinner that fell on the exact day I was going to be at a satellite office. Well, in the interest of truth, I arranged to be at the satellite office as soon as the plan was made and said I'd see them all at the restaurant they chose, because it's like 25 miles from my husband's work and my usual office and a couple miles from that satellite office. Maybe less, actually. But my in-laws' house is more or less halfway between the usual work and the restaurant. Thanks to the miracle that is my husband's inability to arrive on time, anywhere, anytime, and my in-laws' sense of entitlement that of course their son should automatically know they expected him to pick them up, the dinner never happened. By the time they arrived at the restaurant, I'd already been gone a while. That's right. I waited at the bar until the server said, "We have to give up your table." And I said, "I understand." And I left. I texted my husband and went home. The three of them ended up eating when a table freed up for them, and I never heard about it again. A couple more weeks passed, and between my in-laws and me there was exactly zero crossover. When they called and my husband was home, he'd answer and I'd find things to do elsewhere. Like, seems like the perfect time to drive across town, that kind of elsewhere. At one point, my husband said my mother-in-law asked me to call her the next day, and I told him I wasn't going to do that. It wasn't even an angry conversation, and it was the only time he said anything about it to me. Though I'm sure it came up every time they talked. At any time, he could have picked up the phone and dialed while I was sitting there, and we could have had a conference call. But he didn't ask, and I didn't offer. Meanwhile, after Thanksgiving, 2016 stupidity, I configured my email so that everything coming from my father-in-law went to its own folder unopened. I had a vague idea that I'd read it when I felt like it, but I basically avoided doing anything in a timely manner, so I expected there would be fewer and fewer emails to review. It makes no sense for them to email me on Sunday to do XYZ on Monday, and I'm not going to open it until Friday. After I opened the message about what they expected of me for Thanksgiving 2017, which I forwarded to my husband, I got a very petulant email from my father-in-law saying it was time I read his messages. I guess he had read receipts that I didn't see, and since then I haven't opened a single email. I never looked at the folder where they kept accumulating. They're all still there unread to this day. Which brings us, remember how my mother-in-law story started more or less on the eve of my in-laws' annual event? Well, apparently they decided 2018 was the year I was taking charge of the dirty work of that event. In their defense, there really isn't anyone else, except their daughter, who doesn't live here and who they treat like garbage, so she hasn't come since before the 2017 holidays. Or their son, my husband, who does live here, but would say no if they proposed it. Or the legion of professional event planners found online. Except for all those people, I'm the last best option. Apparently, they made the preliminary reservations they could and sent me their instructions by email and kept sending them to me and gave my contact information to the caterers, etc. If I got weird messages on the answering machine, but I ignored them. My husband teaches a large competitive class. We have an unusual last name and the numbers in the directory. Prank calls are frequent. Some geniuses even try to text the landline. So a bunch of weird calls about things I never booked and pending payments or you'll lose your reservation or whatever. I ignored them. I didn't even mention it to my husband because, well, the pranks have been going on for almost 20 years. We used to use code names for our dinner reservations because of this kind of troublemaker. For God's sake. Luckily, my mother-in-law figured out just in time that I'd completely dropped the ball. She was furious. She left incendiary messages for me and my husband about how I almost ruined their event this year, how I almost destroyed it. But thank God she discovered in time that I was trying to sabotage their event. She recovered everything they'd ever emailed me, and she was the one who wrote the checks and made the decisions as she should have from the beginning. But she was trying to be nice and include me. Yeah, that's her version. Then it got very interesting. I'd mentioned they always insisted on the exact date they were commemorating. Nothing about moving it to the nearest weekend for anyone's convenience. Well, this year the anniversary fell on Friday, Good Friday, the first night of Passover. And the eve of the event, the dinner I'd made my husband late for last year because of my mother-in-law. My husband was committed to giving an exam, and since faculty don't schedule these things as much as the registrar's office does, coordinating over 600 students and the accommodation to seat them in every third chair, one row yes and another no, really is a tactical feat. There was no way to reschedule it even if he'd wanted to. All my mother-in-law's screaming and crying and implied tearing of garments only made my husband start dodging her calls too. Maybe they still had the typical dinner, just family, plus best friends of the moment in their apartment. I don't know why I didn't go, and neither did my sister-in-law or anyone from her family. In the end, no one went to their Friday events, not even my sister-in-law and her family, not even their local friends, no one. When my husband said he wanted us to go to the big dinner on the actual day so it wouldn't be a total loss, I told him I'd go, but only if I could sit alone at the kids' table where they've put me since the beginning of time. So he didn't go either, and as far as I know, it never took place. Number. Update 13. I'll try to be brief, but it was too funny not to share. Though my mother-in-law isn't involved, but another just as narcissistic one is. A young man I know got divorced sad, but that's how it is. He and his ex were more or less stuck in the house they bought together for almost 6 months. This month, they finally had an offer approved, and closing is Tuesday. Monday is a holiday here in the US, specifically Memorial Day. While they were married, the ex's family was very involved in their life. Among other things, they gave them furniture that wasn't exactly to their taste, same with kitchen stuff, dishes and such, curtains, whatever. The ex-husband didn't seem to mind. It wasn't the kind of stuff that interested him. But when they decided to divorce, the ex's mother, a mother-in-law, got possessive. Everything that had been a gift had to go back to them. The ex-husband is leaving this house with his clothes and his electronics, his big TV, some things he had before the marriage, and his dog. That's it. No furniture, no kitchen utensils, nothing. He didn't even fight it, which annoyed his own family, but he said the only thing he cared about was the dog. Period. His ex-in-laws, on the other hand, refused to believe he didn't care, and that he was actually playing some kind of long game. They were so convinced they pressured their daughter to detail everything in writing and include it in the divorce decree. The ex-husband said, okay, signed, and then had to fight with her over using her microwave and a laundry basket of hers. It was ridiculous and ugly. There was even a whole thing about the big TV he bought after the divorce was finalized. The ex-in-laws thought that should go to them too. Honestly, these people. I've lost a lot of respect for the ex-wife. She let her sister move in without paying rent and let her mother do whatever she wanted. But yesterday morning he picked up the trailer and along with some friends loaded his stuff. They didn't even fill the trailer. If it weren't for the TV, they would have done it in 2 car trips. Naturally, the ex-sister-in-law was present throughout all this. She's in college, and since classes are already over, apparently she has nothing better to do. She threatened to call the police if he took anything that wasn't on the list. Charming. Just as they were finishing, around 3 p.m., the ex-wife and her mother showed up, and the mother-in-law says clear as day, "Good, you were able to get a trailer. We need it when you're done." The ex-husband didn't take the bait, he's not very talkative. He left, unloaded his stuff where he's staying, and then he and his buddies came to his parents' house, where one of them told all of us, me, his parents, other guests, what happened. We were all laughing at that woman's audacity when the landline rang. The ex-husband's mother answered. It was the ex-mother-in-law asking when he'd be back with the truck and for him to help pack. So he told her, "I already returned the trailer. Remember, everything from my ex-wife has to be out before midnight Monday or it becomes the property of the new owner," and hung up. I really want to go to the closing, but I know it would be in bad taste to ask. Number, update 14. In my previous post about the Memorial Day weekend move, I hinted that my own mother-in-law was being unbearable, and then Mother's Day comes. I've completely dropped the ball on everything related to my in-laws, including Mother's Day. So this year my husband told me which restaurant we were going to and when, and he made all the arrangements. He promised the only thing I had to do was get in the car, which I did, and then get out at their apartment, which I also did. Then the day went to shit. We walked in and my father-in-law had a huge bruise, purple, green, and yellow around his left eye. He has somewhat baggy eyes, but those bags were clearly full of old blood. Later I described it as looking like he'd been punched on Wednesday, again on Friday, and again that very Sunday morning. It was an ugly bruise, not to mention what the hell happened for him to have bruises on top of bruises. My husband looks at him and decides my father-in-law is going to the ER. It's a good idea for many reasons, not just the bruise, which is horrible, but what if there are other injuries? How did the bruise happen? Is someone abusing him? Did he fall? But my mother-in-law doesn't want to spend Mother's Day in the ER. Fair enough. And she doesn't see why we can't take him after we eat. Keep in mind that for her that bruise is old news. She's been looking at it for days. Plus she's a selfish cow. After a quick argument, my husband and I agreed I'd stay with my mother-in-law, something that never happens anymore, and he'd take his father to the ER. A little screeching breaks out because he planned to take the car we arrived in, and I was like, hell no. My in-laws have a car. Let them take that one. I'm not staying here without transportation. What if they admit my father-in-law and my husband has to stay? What if something happens with my mother-in-law on paper? She's the more vulnerable one. The reason they're recruiting me to stay is she's not supposed to be alone for long periods. No, no, and no. My husband was pissed at me, at his father who was being an asshole, and at his mother who was being a baby. Still, he agreed because the only other options I gave him were that I could drop them both off at the ER and go home, or I could call a taxi as soon as he left the apartment and go home. If he wanted me to stay with his mother, he was going to have to leave me the car. So they go down to the garage and we didn't hear from them for several hours. As soon as they left, my mother-in-law turns to me and says, "Take me shopping," and I answer, "No." Then she said a lot of nasty things, started slamming kitchen cabinet doors, insulting me, and then she spoke the magic words that she was going to report me. To whom or why, no idea, so I took out my phone and started recording very conspicuously. She went on for a while until she realized I hadn't said a single word since my initial no. When she turned around and saw me recording, she basically had an old lady fit. She screamed that I had no right, and that's when I spoke, saying the date and time. And then my mother-in-law, her name, just said she's going to report me. So for the rest of my stay here, I'll continue recording. And I did for the next 6 hours or so. At one point I opened a cabinet to get myself some crackers and she started shrieking that I was stealing her food, but overall it was quiet. She said a few nasty things in her language and disappeared into her bedroom and locked the door. I guess I heard a click. I didn't try the doorknob. Time during which I paused the video, but every time she stuck her head out to make demands, make me, get me, I'd resume recording and point the camera at her. I actually made the tea. It was still on the counter when I left later. At some point in all this, she managed to reach my husband at the ER to tell him I was abusing her. When he called later, much later, it was clear he hadn't believed her. But he did ask what was going on, so I told him I'd recorded everything and would give him a copy we could discuss after he watched it. I found that recounting her bad behavior gets me all worked up and then I take it out on him, which isn't fair. This way they can't accuse me of exaggerating or making things up or misinterpreting. If I have a video of my mother-in-law screaming "I hate you, bitch," it's very hard to argue she doesn't actually hate me and never meant to call me a bitch. He wasn't thrilled with the situation and asked if I could try to keep her quiet. And I asked what he suggested, given that she'd locked herself in another room and from my perspective she was quiet enough. If he had a problem with his mother calling to complain about me, he should address it with her directly. It was a long day. I read the hell out of Sherlock Holmes, which was good. I did a little online shopping. I texted my niece who called her grandmother my mother-in-law at that moment, knowing the landline isn't in the bedroom, to be able to say Happy Mother's Day without actually talking to her. Smart girl. My husband and my father-in-law came back about 6 hours later, which isn't bad, really. My father-in-law said at the ER that he slipped in the shower and hit his head against the wall, but caught himself before falling. It may or may not be true, it's certainly plausible. They scolded him for not having seen his doctor, given that he takes blood thinners, and for waiting 4 days to go to the ER, which my husband enjoyed telling me. I have no idea if my husband watched the video. In total, it'll be about 35 minutes. I wouldn't have watched it. I did tell him my mother-in-law had called me a word in her language and that from now on, when her friends ask why I don't show up anymore, I'm going to tell them what she calls me and ask them to define it for me. The following weekend we did a Mother's Day repeat. I told my husband we could drive together to the restaurant and meet my in-laws there, or he could go pick them up and call me from the restaurant when everyone was already there. And then, and only then, would I get in my car and go, because I'm sick of missing meals because they can't get organized. If neither option worked, I'd be happy not to go. We met at the restaurant. A lot of guilt was attempted, for all the things they wanted done in their apartment. The printer only prints in black and white. The landline ringer is too quiet. But my husband said he'd stop by during the week to take care of it and then he didn't. Which brings us to Father's Day and that'll be a post for another day. I also know I owe an update on the actual subject of my last post. The short version is the house is sold, the new owners already have the house and quite a few more free kitchen appliances. The closing was a saga. The final walkthrough was quite an adventure and I'll relate it eventually. But the teaser is yes, if the wife had removed her family from his house, from his work, from his bedroom, she'd probably still be married to the man she gives every sign of still loving. He, on the other hand, has moved on big time. Number update 15. I know I keep threatening to update about the meltdown from the move weekend and separately about how unfun Father's Day was. But for various reasons, my husband and I stopped by my narcissistic in-laws' house for literally 15 minutes. When I described what happened on Mother's Day, I said my mother-in-law had started calling me yelling something in her native language that I assumed meant bitch, but when I put it in Google Translate, it comes out as nonsense words. I should say many of her expressions seem innocuous. There's one about digging up your mother's onions and another that has to do with eating more than 2 types of cheese in one sitting. I trust my husband when he says it's bad. Period. Which brings us to what my mother-in-law called me. I knew it was ugly or she wouldn't have said it, and I toyed with the idea of introducing myself by that name. And suddenly there I was in my in-laws' kitchen. My husband and his parents were at the table and the phone rang. I often answer the landline at their house. I move faster than them. Many times they ask me to answer it. So I said, "Hello, dirty name residence." There was immediate silence in the kitchen and not a sound on the other end. I started to say, "Hello again," and then I hear laughter. My brother-in-law, my husband's sister's husband, also from their country, is on the line laughing so hard he could barely form words. Finally he says my name, my real name, and asks, "What the hell was that?" I told him that dirty name is what my mother-in-law calls me, but she won't tell me what it means. At that point, my mother-in-law screamed. She said she would never use that word, and that I'm a liar. So I played the video on my phone. You can hear it clearly, her calling me dirty name. My brother-in-law is laughing hysterically on the phone. My father-in-law and my husband are sitting there saying nothing, and my mother-in-law lets out a shriek and runs at the speed that only a woman with a walker can to her bedroom, where she slowly turns through the door and tries to slam it, but it bounces off the walker. My father-in-law then, very, very slowly, goes around the table, goes to the bedroom and manages to close the door. When I looked at my husband, he was shaking with laughter. My brother-in-law asked to talk to him. I handed him the phone and they had a short conversation punctuated by laughter. That was pretty much it, except on the way home my husband kept laughing and told me not to call myself or anyone else dirty name. He tried to translate it, but it doesn't make any sense. Apparently it means something like mistress, kind of like friend of Dorothy means gay. Whatever. I hope you enjoyed it. Edit. It translates roughly as milk bottle left out for the milkman.